Well, good afternoon, friends. I am so excited to welcome you to another episode of Storytime. We start this episode every week as we talk about how important the stories that we carry in this world, but we hold on to and hold back for our lives, how important they are in the lives and the hearts of those around us. One of my favorite sayings is that our stories can be one of two things. They can either be the chains that hold us back, or they can be our keys to freedom. Well, on today's episode, we're going to take our storytelling series to a little bit of a twist because many times we find that while stories can be powerful and impactful for others, a lot of times the stories that we have that hold us back or propel us forward are the ones that we tell ourselves in our minds. And my guest today, Jen Hardy, she is the COO of MotivAction, and she works with people, individuals, and groups on this very specific thing: how to really rewrite your story and help you have the life that you were designed and created for. So I'm excited to bring Jen on the stage today and to share with you a little bit about her unique story, how she got into what she does, and how she helps others really make a difference in their lives. So welcome, Jen. So happy to have you on today. And I love the title, the Academy of MotivAction. I love your team and your partnership and what you do. But I would first love for you to share with us today a little bit about you.
A little bit about me. Well, as you mentioned, I'm currently the COO at the Academy of MotivAction with my best friend and business partner, Irina Alexander. And we work as what we call neurostrategic mentors, where we're using a lot of neuroscience tactics around resilience, emotional literacy, communication. And we love to do workshops and actually get in and do speaking opportunities, any place that we can get out there and really share our content, share our information with people, whether that's privately or within groups or teams. That's just really what we love to do. But personally, I'm also a big soccer advocate. I've played soccer my entire life. I coached soccer. I'm a former educator and state championship soccer coach. And I still get out on the field every Sunday to get out there and run around with those youngins as much as I can.
Fun. Oh, right now it's this time of year where you want to be outside, right? It's so pretty outside here in Central Texas. And I bet that is just and I'm sure that exercise and that personal fitness can really help you with the work that you do, right? Because that mind, body, spirit connection that we all carry and have. Well, Jen, you talked about speaking opportunities and things like that. And as we have really seen a shift over the last couple of years in the workplace, in the community, we've really seen a heightened awareness around how our minds work, how our brains work, how we all bring all of that to the workplace, and how it's really been ignored for a long time, right? So can you talk a little bit about how did you get into this world and what excites you about the stories that you get to share with people?
Oh, goodness. I want to start backwards. I'm like, what excites me about the stories that I get to share with people? Well, it's what we were talking about before we jumped on here, right? Which is an opportunity for people to see themselves, to understand themselves, to have an awareness of themselves that they didn't have before, that makes such a dramatic difference. It's that aha moment, that light bulb turning on, that catalyzes them, that pushes them forward into who they've always known themselves to be, but maybe didn't believe. And just watching that start to unfold over time. Like, I love getting text messages from friends and from people who've been in a workshop or in a speaking engagement or who I've worked with privately or whatever. And they're just watching them continue to elevate and grow. It's just such an amazing thing to be a part of. It's such a gift. And as far as how I got here, people always ask me, like, what was the catalyst to start going down a self-development road? And I heard someone recently tell me that the research says that some sort of trauma will push you into that space, and because it's usually within your mid-30s. So by the time we hit our early 30s, a lot of our belief systems of ourselves pretty locked in. So for something to really and truly change, a lot of times it has to be quote unquote trauma. Now, it could be capital T trauma or little t trauma, it doesn't matter. But for me, it was a bad breakup. It was a bad breakup that really just had me feeling broken. And I must be the problem.
Mm.
And that was like, it wasn't the beginning of the self-development journey. That was a few years prior, but it was the like gut punch.
Right.
Something's still not right. I've done all these other things. I've read the books and I've practiced the language and thought I was doing pretty good, but something's still not quite there.
Yeah.
And I went to Landmark here in Austin, and that was my first real introduction into actual self-development, where you get coaches or where you get support and you're not just reading books or listening to podcasts, but getting someone to help you get out of your own way, right? And I went in thinking I was going to work on relationships and love, and it turns out it was all family. It was all family. It was a relationship with my father, the relationship with my mother, with my sister, and really figuring out that if I wanted the life I wanted, I was going to have to start taking responsibility for the role I was playing in it.
That's a big pill to swallow. You know, I think about so much of what you just shared. I feel like I hit my wall. I wouldn't say it was a big T. I would say it was a lot of little T's, right, for me. And I hit that wall. I had turned 40, like the year I turned 40. So maybe I am a little slow. No, I'm just kidding. But I feel like absolutely what you're saying is so true, you know, and you were going there for the place of the external, like relationships, love, those things that are external. And what we find when we start this self-development journey is really it's all the internal things. I love how you brought up beliefs, and beliefs are a great segue into the StoryTime talk that we're really going to spend time on today. So I'm glad you said that. And one of the things that I discovered about myself, and I want to hear how you discovered it was a belief situation here in a minute. But one of the things that I discovered about myself in 2019, I had won this trip to go to Vegas with one of my businesses, and I was so excited about it. And we had gotten to this event, and we had this big like ceremonial type thing, and the leaders of the event said, "Hey, we're going to work on limiting beliefs." And that's really the first time I had heard the concept of a limiting belief. And I was like, I don't have any limiting beliefs. I'm the most positive person that I know. Like, there's no way I have a limiting belief. Like, I quit a full-time job. I now am fully self-employed. I homeschool my kid. Like, I am so full of abundance in my thinking. Oh, was I deceived? Because I really didn't understand what limiting beliefs were. And it really wasn't until 3 years later, when I started working with a naturopath doctor, that she pointed out a limiting belief. And my mind was blown about the amount of limitations that I had. And what I came to realize is a limiting belief is not what I thought it was, right? I thought it was just somebody with a bad attitude. Like, what's wrong with it?
It's part of it.
What I found was a limiting belief was a limit of how far you're willing to believe. And I thought, my goodness, when you put it in that context, I ran into them everywhere. So I would love for you to talk about, how did you discover some limitations in thinking? And what does it feel like from a practitioner side when you're helping somebody else discover a limiting belief?
So first, how I figured out mine. I mean, goodness, I think we both can say from this point in our lives that we're never done figuring them out. We're never done uncovering them. We're like just layers.
I know what you look like now. Right?
Yeah, it's like we joke like new level, new devil. What comes up now? But for me, it really took being in spaces where other people had an opportunity to reflect back to me. Because I like to say a lot of times we feel like we're caged, right? We feel like we're stuck in this box. Right. And sometimes it takes someone else to let us know that we're actually standing within 4 pillars that we can walk out of at any point in time. But we think we're stuck in that box. So that's why I believe that like books and podcasts, great places to start. And when you're ready to go to the next level, you need an event, you need a coach, you need someone to support you, because you can't hear your own stuff. You can't hear your own beliefs. Not the way that they are when someone's like, did you just hear what came out of your mouth?
I know. So can you reflect on what was one that was pointed out to you?
Gosh, you know what's interesting to me about beliefs is once you start to get rid of them, they're like gone. But I know that I've had the most recent one was a fear of success.
Ah, okay. Let's
Yep.
unpack that a little bit, because I used to hear about the fear of success and I thought, who would be afraid of that? Like, that sounds so bizarre to me until
Yep.
I realized that I, in fact, also had that fear. So, can you unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. So this one's the most recent, so it's easier for me to remember. I had started diving into some Tony Robbins stuff just for fun. I mean, he's obviously the king of NLP. He doesn't claim much of it as much nowadays, but I was listening to one of his audio tracks for one of his events, and it was basically practicing screaming yes and screaming no, and what it feels like and what it sounds like. And it was around like, think about what it is that you want in life and like really say yes. And I was in my car, so I'm like screaming. And then I realized when I screamed the yes, it wasn't a good, joy, happy yes the way I expected it to be. It was almost terrifying. And it was like, oh, what was that?
Wow.
And when I stopped for a minute and I was like, okay, what was that? And I realized that I'd watched my father for 30 years be extremely successful, do a lot of wonderful, beautiful things, make the money, all the different variations of success. But I also never got to spend time with my father. So his success in my mind was at the expense of his loved ones, of his family, of his quality time, of his joy. And so I had those two things linked, that success equaled I must give up who I now have, the love of my life. I must give him up. I'm going to have to give up my friends. I'm going to have to give up the things I enjoy doing, right? It's going to cost me all the things that I love and that are important to me. And it was like, oh, okay. That's definitely something we need to dig into a little more. And the first thing I did was go home and talk to my boyfriend about it and let him know, like, hey, I realized I'm terrified that if I continue to get successful, I'm going to lose you. And he's like, no, because that's one of the best ways to deal with a belief system that's stuck is start confronting the things you think are true at that level and find out if they are or aren't, right? Because he could have said, yeah, if you keep getting successful and start being gone and this and that's not going to work. And then I would have a choice, but up to that point, I was just working unconsciously.
Right. And it was all stuck here, but it was affecting everything around you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, the self-sabotage when you have those unconscious belief systems getting in the way. Yeah. So you asked me, what is it like when you're working with somebody? I'm going to be real transparent. It's frustrating. Yeah. Because sometimes you can hear it so clearly and you can see it so clearly. Right. But the longer I've been in this work, the longer I've learned, me telling you, because they're like, just tell me, what are you hearing? I'm like, it doesn't work. If you don't discover it, I'm not doing you any favors.
Right. No, 100%. And that's why reading the books is a good thing. You can see it through somebody else's lens, but until you truly internalize it and have somebody help guide you through it, it's crazy. I remember with my first time I realized I had a limiting belief, my naturopath doctor said, okay, Teresa, you have been working on your body. You've been working on your fitness. You've been working on your nutrition, like all the things, right? She goes, what do you want your body to look like? And I was like, what do you mean I get to pick? And she was like, yeah, like, how would you like your body to look? And I was like, well, can I get taller? I mean, I was kind of joking. I knew that wasn't, well, it actually is a reality. But anyway, you can in fact get taller. But I kept struggling and finally I was like, well, here's a picture that I want to look like. And she was like, okay, well, why'd you pick that picture? And I said, well, because that's the closest picture that I could come up with that looked like me in high school. And she was like, well, why do you want to look like how you looked in high school? Are you eating the way you did in school? Are you, doing all these things? And I'm like, no, like I was eating fried chicken and, all the junk, right, in high school. And she goes, did you have the same mindset in high school that you have? No. And she was like, well, then why are you limiting yourself to that? And I said, well, I guess that's because that's as far as I've seen. And that is where I had ran into that limiting belief, was that it was literally, I could only allow myself to see so far because I had seen it in the past, as opposed to what abundance could look like. And so for me, just that realization of, wow, like I am putting the limitations around my ability to dream, believe, and do things. And since then I've been working with her for 3.5 years, and we're crafting this very specific outcome, which is so cool. But until she pointed that out, Jen, I really didn't think that I had any limiting beliefs. And that was just a story that I was telling myself. And the story that you shared, the story about success, I mean, that was a legitimate story, right? Of if I reach this, that means I have to do this. Well, that was somebody else's story, not yours. How
Absolutely.
many times do you find as you work with people that they pick up somebody else's story and own it?
Oh, goodness. So often, right? I mean, it's the first place to look, is look at all of the cultural, the familial, look at like society. I mean, goodness, as women, how many of them have been passed down through generations and generations and generations and generations that are just in our DNA at this point. But until we stop and think about it, we don't even know that we're acting from this space. And there's so many things, like people are constantly saying stuff around us. What are you consuming? What are you listening to? What are you watching? What are you taking in? What is your, the 5 people you spend the most time with? They're all impacting your belief systems constantly. They're all unconscious suggestions to your unconscious mind, especially if you're not protecting what's coming in.
Right. Yeah, it's so powerful. And so, when with Unbreakable, our third pillar is beliefs, and we really dig into what beliefs look like and what that means for us, and whether it's our individual belief that we chose intentionally to believe, or if it was one that was passed over to us. I know you probably heard the story about the barbecue and the brisket, and how somebody is going up to mom and saying, "Hey, mom, why did you cut the burnt ends off the brisket?" Have you heard this story before?
I haven't. Wait, tell me.
Okay, it's such a fun story. And he goes up to his mom and he's like, "Hey, mom, we're at this barbecue. Why did you cut the burnt ends off of the brisket? Don't you know that's like the juiciest, most delicious part of the brisket?" And those of you that aren't from Texas, you'll learn when you come visit us that the juicy part of the brisket is the burnt ends, right? Doesn't sound like it, but it's the best part.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was like, "Well, I don't know, go ask Aunt Sally why, that's just the way she did it. So go ask Aunt Sally." And so he goes and he asks Aunt Sally, and he says, "Aunt Sally, why did you teach my mom to cut off the burnt ends of the brisket? Don't you know that that's where the best part is?" And she goes, "Oh, honey, that's the way that, grandma told me. So go ask grandma, why did she do it that way?" And so he goes to grandma and he's like, "Grandma, now, in Texas, that the best part of the brisket is the burnt ends. Why do you cut that off? Where is it? Why are we losing the juices of it?" And she says, "Oh, honey, because my pan was only so big." Right?
Yeah.
And I love that illustration, because so many times in life, I feel like that we pick up the beliefs of somebody else, and they don't even know why they picked up that belief, because they didn't take the time to do what you and I help people do, which is self-discover and understand what is really important to you to take your life to the next level. So tell me, Jen, with that story in mind and with the amazing work that you do, how do you help people, like in this story? How do you help them rediscover the juices of life? When I think about my brisket, I think about the juicy part and how much of that juicy part we give away. So how do you help people recapture their juices of life?
So the funny part about that is how we help people recapture the juiciness, which I love, which people are not going to like, is it's figuring out how to take responsibility. It's recognizing wherever you don't have the juice is on you. And that takes education. It takes awareness. It takes a willingness.
Yeah.
Because I think that's actually, to me, the number one thing that stops most people from having the life they desire is, right, they're just so comfortable even in the yuck because it's known. right? We prefer the known versus the unknown, and the unknown is terrifying. And the idea of taking responsibility for the unknown and all the things, it's a lot. You said it's a heavy pill to swallow. It's a smack in the face. It's a punch in the gut, and you got to be willing to go there.
Yeah.
And is it worth it to you to have that juice, to have that joy, to have that light? Because I think it is. And I'm willing to roll around in the muck for it if that's what it takes.
Yeah.
And those are the people that we want to be around. Those are the people that we surround ourselves with in our community, and the people we want to work with is like people who are like, yeah, I realize I'm going to have to get right up in it. I like to say, you're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to roll around in it or rub it all over you and be all right with it and learn to enjoy it, because on the other side of it is just zest and zeal and alacrity and just this joy that you didn't even know existed. Because you said earlier, like, you didn't even know the body you could have. You didn't even know what to consider. How often I've asked people, okay, we're going to set this goal. Cool. Now, how will you know when you have it? What's going to happen? What's going to look like? What's it going to sound like? What's it going to feel like? What's life going to be like? And they're like, I've never created it before. So how am I supposed to do that? And I'm like, that's the beautiful part. You get to make it whatever you want.
Right.
You get to consider it however you want to consider it. But we've been so conditioned, right, that the idea of getting creative around who can I be and what could I do, it's limited. Instead of just being like, what if it could be anything? What if it could be however you wanted it to be? Not saying it will.
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt to throw it out there and see what happens.
But what if? And who's willing to chase the what if, right? And so one of the things that you spoke about is being stuck. And, a lot of people, like, I was stuck, Jen. I was stuck for about 10 years, and I didn't even know that I was stuck. I called it running into walls. I felt like I was literally running into a wall in this career, running into a wall there, running into a wall with this relationship. And what I learned in my self-discovery journey was that I, in fact, was the one that put those walls up. And of course I was going to run into them because they were everywhere I went, because I put them there, right? But how would somebody that's watching this that says, I don't know if that's me, and should I investigate this? What would be some questions that maybe you could help them self-discover, self-reflect on, and say, maybe it is time. Maybe I am tired of being just okay, being okay. Or, what does that look like? How would you help somebody discover if they're stuck?
One way is to get outside and ask your surroundings, right? Ask some of your community. Because again, sometimes you might not see it for yourself. But there's also a pitfall there to recognize when people see stuff. Yeah, they might be stuck too, or they might be projecting things onto you. I remember a woman called me asking for support and potentially wanting to be a client. And she was saying that everybody in her community was saying this, that, and the other about her. And I was like, okay, but is it a problem for you? And she was like, well, no. And I'm like, but she's like, but everybody keeps telling me. And I'm like, but is it a problem for you? Yeah. No, but everybody keeps telling me. I'm like, babe, it's not a problem for you. I don't care what everybody else is telling you. I'm not going to take your money and take you on as a client if you don't think it's a problem. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So with that said, one of the questions to ask yourself is, how is this a problem for me? Is it a problem? Because there's times where, again, we're bumping up against things. We say once something happens could be a coincidence. Twice might be a pattern. 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 walls. Like, that's a pattern. Yeah. Right? So what's happening here? What's going on? How is this a problem? What is it that I keep thinking about this, or what is being projected back to me, right? Those moments of frustration, of anger, of resentment, or we get really triggered in those ways. I know that word's kind of one of those things right now, but those negative emotions, it's reflecting something back to us that we're not aware of. It's the whole reason it's there. When we have those blow-ups of emotion, they're normal, they're human, experience them. And what is it triggering for me? What beliefs, what am I making this mean right now? Right. About me, about the world, about them. So how's it a problem? Is it a problem? What am I making this mean right now? What could be getting projected back to me right now? How many times have I seen a different version of the same story
Mm.
What are the common traits other than me, right? Because I mean, I was, you know, I told you I went to Landmark because of a bad breakup, because it was a different version of the same guy. And it was the similar stories kept happening. There were threads that were similar. And I was like, okay, well, at this point, all I can see is that I'm the common thread. And
Sure.
it wasn't until I got into Landmark to realize that I was the common thread, but more specifically, believing that I didn't deserve love,
Mm.
that I was not enough, that I was not worth it. And learning that those were deep seated in me was going to attract men that, even if they were good men, I was going to sabotage them into not good men because I didn't believe that I deserved that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I love that vulnerability. And, you know, I also think sometimes it's hard for people to get to that place. And so I'm so grateful that you had something that you were like, okay, I keep running into this. What does that mean? And I believe that there is a lot of times people will say, okay, the common denominator is me. And then they won't investigate further. And so then they settle, right? So they
Mm-hmm.
settle for a life of being alone potentially, or mediocrity, or less than, or poverty instead of abundance. Like, you know, what is the danger of not digging deeper? What would you say?
I think you already said it, mediocrity. I mean, do you want to continue? I mean, like, look at our world right now. Look at how separated, how unhappy, how high the suicide rates are for teenagers. I mean, just for society in general, how disconnected we are. I mean, our quality of life is based on our relationships with other humans. And right now, we're doing everything we can to not have those relationships, it seems like. And it literally rips me apart. Like, I have a hard time. It's part of why I do what I do, because I want humanity to come back together. I don't care if you agree. You don't have to agree. Agree to disagree. But can we please just communicate with each other? Can we have relationships with each other? So to me, the cost of not being willing to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize, like, what am I projecting onto everybody else? What am I not willing to take responsibility for and witness and be aware of? The cost is your life.
Absolutely. And the next generation.
Oh God, definitely the next generation. I don't have kids, so sometimes I forget that element, but absolutely the next generation.
Yeah, yeah. You know, there's an experiment that was done, I don't know, in the 60s or something. And maybe it's not even a real experiment, but I use it all the time because I think it is so important. And it's how to train a flea. Have you heard about that?
How to Train a Flea. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
So it's super cool. You'll have to look it up on YouTube. But essentially what happens is there's this experiment that's done where a scientist, you know, gets a beaker and fills, you know, puts a bunch of fleas in it and sticks the fleas in a mason jar, closes them up, and then leaves the room for 3 days. And at the end of the 3 day period, he comes back and he's like, let's see how their patterns and their behaviors and all of that has been modified over this time. So he opens up the lid, and to his astonishment, they don't jump out of the
Mm.
jar. They just stay in that jar. And so he leaves it open for a couple of hours and he notices that they're not getting out. And so then he's like, I'm going to try something. So he tips the jar upside down. And Jen, they literally maintain the shape of that jar.
What?
Yes. And at the end of the video, the end of the experiment, he says, now this is so important for you to get. He says, not only did these fleas maintain those boundaries that were set by somebody else, but they also, for the next generation, their offspring stayed within those same boundaries. And so when we think about what is the potential downside of not digging in and confronting some of these stories that we tell ourselves, or potentially some of the beliefs that we picked up from others, it's that, right?
Mhm.
And you know, here's what I love this story too. The 3 days represent 3% of the average flea lifespan. Like, I didn't know this, but fleas live about 100 days. Okay. The pandemic that we just got out of, right, represents 4.6% of the average human lifespan. And just like those fleas, we have the ability and the risk of being confined to all of the metaphorical jars that were placed around us.
Mm.
And so to me, I would say, Jen, for you, the work that you do both for individuals and for organizations, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment, this is huge because we've got to now expand the limitations and to get back out and say, okay, you actually need community. I know you were told for 3 years that you don't need community. I know you were told for 3 years not to trust anybody and that even your parents, the division, like all the things, right? But you need it. So let's talk about moving forward. Let's talk a little bit about, I love that illustration. And I think it's so powerful because it's so vivid. And it's a great representation of the human race without saying that we're in a jar, even though we were, right? So when we think about going forward and the work that you do, not only for individuals, but for organizations, how can you help somebody reshape the stories they've told themselves and the beliefs that they've been confined to that can make a difference, not only for an individual, but for an organization?
So, Mike, like that's a loaded question. But it's when we think about work, right? Like most people spend more time at work than they even do at home.
Yeah.
You look at a child and their work is school, and they spend more time with their teachers than they do and their friends than they do with their family sometimes. So that is your environment, right? It is what has the biggest impact on you. And we already know that the 5 people you spend the most time with, right, have a direct impact on everything about you.
Right.
Similarly to the fleas, the crab in a bucket story is my favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Right? When you've got the crabs, they'll all get in the bucket together and they're all happy in the bucket moving around until one crab gets excited and wants to crawl out of the bucket, right? And the rest of the crabs grab it, pull it back down. They're like, no, get back in the bucket. It's safe in the bucket. We know what's happening in the bucket. We want to be in the bucket. Stay in the bucket.
Yes.
And the crab's like, but I really want to know what's out of the bucket. It tries to climb back out and gets yanked back down. And I think a lot of times we think of that metaphor within our families and within our personal relationships. But we're working with first responders, we're working with educators, we're working with high stress professionals. And this is happening in a culture, in a work culture, where if, for example, in first responders, I mean, it's a cultural belief system, right? That mental health, suicidal thoughts, that's weak. It's cowardly. You're going to get, you're a danger. We're going to put you to a desk. You might get fired. Why am I going to talk about it then?
Right.
Why am I going to bring it up? Like I could, and this is not all the way around, but there are a lot of departments where that's still the thought process. That's still the culture that exists.
Sure.
Right. And it's looking at like this guy who wants to crawl out of the bucket and make a change, but everybody's like, that's vulnerability. We don't really do that. Vulnerable can get us killed. Well, it can tactically and in the field, but we're talking about your life. We're talking about your mental health and well-being. And this, we've seen that this transfers into education. This transfers over into high stress professionals. We've got to shift the culture of vulnerable conversations and vulnerable leadership and what that actually means. It doesn't mean harming people. Right? It doesn't mean just spilling everything all over everybody, but it does mean being willing to have a conversation that isn't easy and figuring out how to navigate that with each other.
Yeah, I love that. And, as I was listening to you, one of the things that really made me think back even on the flea experiment is the next generation. So the next generation that you're talking about is the next generation of that career. The teachers, the next generation are the students, right? They say more is caught than taught. And so much of that environment that we're in, when we see somebody react and respond, it's sending those messages, the stories back to our mind that says, this is how you should respond because that person in authority responds that way.
Yeah.
Right? Or that hero that I've placed on a pedestal, rightfully so, potentially, responded that way. Right? Mm-hmm. And I think about even the medical field. One of my favorite interviews that I've had recently was with a doctor who recently stepped out of the traditional healthcare system for a similar reason. He felt like any outside thinking kind of cut his leg off a little bit, right? And so now he helps people from a holistic health approach. And it's very different, but so freeing for him because he feels like he's actually stepped into his power. And, as we kind of transition the conversation here today, when you support somebody from the stories that they've been telling themselves or the generational beliefs that have been passed on from one to the next, isn't it fun to see how their superpower can emerge?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And for them to realize it and start sending you messages and being like, oh my God, blah, 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 and you're like, I've seen it all along.
I'm not going to brag, but I kind of made you. No, I'm just kidding. You know what I mean? It's so fun to just be able to say, that's my baby. It was so fun to watch them develop, right?
Yeah.
And you get to do that for so many people. So I hope that you do my doctor's favorite exercise where she raises her hands up really high in the air and then she bends her elbow and then she passes. Yes.
Absolutely.
Not quite the yelling in the car, but that Tony Robbins has. Definitely sometimes, and I think about the work that you do and how rewarding it must feel to be able to shift such a important thing in people's lives. I think our minds, our subconscious mind, controls so much more of us than we've ever given it credit for.
95%.
And yet we're running around in autopilot so many times in so many areas, and we don't know why. And so for our viewers today that we're thinking, I'm going to hear what this story is, and then they realize, like you said, earlier, that we have to turn it inward. One of my favorite quotes is from Carl Jung, and he said, "Those who look outside dream, but those who look inside awaken." And that is the power that you get to bring to the table, is helping people look inside, reinvestigate the stories that they've been telling themselves, and really write their next chapter in a very empowering way.
Absolutely. I love Carl Jung. He's got so many great quotes. The one I wanted to share with you is blanking. I'm blanking on it right now, but it's basically understanding someone else's darkness is the best way to understand your own.
So true. So true. And sometimes, I think about the story with your dad and the story. I have a similar story with my dad where we had purchased his company in 2012. And I had a fear of success that I didn't realize I had, because I was afraid that if we took our business to another level, then he might be more sad about the way that he lost his business, almost like a nostalgic sad, right? Like, oh man, that could have been had this not. And so I told myself that story for years, and we literally played small in business until one day, after working with a coach, I came back home and I went and I talked to my dad and I said, Dad, I have to apologize that this is how I feel, but I've got to hear, is this real? Like, could this be real? And he was like, no, why would you even think that? Of course we want you to be successful. Of course we know that you can do much beyond and greater because of what you have access to, right? Yeah. And yet so many times we think something and we're telling ourselves a story, and that story can be so limiting.
Yep. And it takes so much courage. That conversation that you were willing to have, many conversations that I've been willing to have, that we coach people up to have, that vulnerability in communication, in the share, in the acknowledgement, it takes courage. And a lot of people are just like, oh, I'm just not that, I'm not that strong. I just don't have that much courage. I'm like, y'all, courage is a skill. Okay. Courage is a skill, people. Whoever's listening, it's a skill. I used to be terrified of public speaking, podcasting, getting in front of people, getting on stages, which I now do. But it wasn't that I was scared of speaking. I was scared of being heard.
Yeah.
And it took courage. You just start.
So amazing. I feel like our biggest desires as humans that we have come to believe, is to be seen, valued, and heard.
Yep.
Yet those are usually our biggest fears.
Yep.
Isn't that amazing? And so the thing that we're so
human.
hungry, the thing that we're so hungry for is the thing that we will be afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. So for somebody that needs to build that courage muscle, Jen, what would be a good piece of advice that you could give them?
Leap. Try it. I mean, even if it's a small one, just do it. Just try. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to fail. Awesome.
Yeah.
Failure is just feedback. It's just feedback. And we say fail forward, fail fast. The faster you fail, the faster you move forward, the more feedback you get, the better it'll get, the faster you'll get there. But if you're not even willing to give it a shot, you're just going to stay right where you are.
Just stay right where you are. Yeah. I heard that quote recently that said most men, or well, of course, they're talking about men and women, will live the same year for 90 years. But the brave man or woman will live a new year every year for 90 years, right? Yeah. We go further, we challenge ourselves, and then in that process, we give other people permission to also challenge themselves.
Absolutely. Right? You know, I like to, for me, fear, when I start to get the anxiousness or the nervousness or the feeling of fear, whatever that might be, that's when I pause and check in. And I'm like, okay, is this fear like safety? Like, because, you know, danger's real. Let's make sure it's not dangerous and I need to evacuate. Or is it just my nervous system going, this is uncomfortable, new, and uncertain? And if that's the case, here we go. We're moving forward. But pause long enough to check in with what is it, because we do have to acknowledge the psychological safety we're experiencing in that moment. Right. And if it's at a heightened level so high that the idea of doing the thing, it might actually be a negative experience, and then that might not give us the courage to do it again. So there is a weight between, you know, is it just anxiousness and nerves of uncertainty, and do I realize that I am safe and I can try this and it'll be okay, even if I mess up, fail, or say something stupid or whatever it is? Or is there an element of danger that I need to be aware of? And then let's deal with that if that's the case.
I think that's such a beautiful thought and action that somebody can take. I feel like over the last several years, particularly post-pandemic, but also with the influx and the heightened access that we have to, you know, technology, to social media, to all of those things that are constantly stimulating us, I feel like more people are finding themselves in a constant state of anxiety, right? And when that happens, I remember a time that I was in the beach, in the ocean, and I was on like the sandbar. And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, my foot slipped off of the sandbar. And I literally, everything in me just forgot how to operate. Like fear took over. My voice forgot how to say help. My arms forgot how to, you know, make the movement. And it's because I was trapped in fear. And fortunately, I was able to take a deep breath and, you know, regain consciousness and, you know, all the things that you need to be able to take your step out of that moment and that space. But for people that find themselves in that constant level of high stress, high anxiety, is there a specific modality or a specific technique that maybe you could walk them through to just help them start to get in tune with the body and start saying, okay, is this a real thing? Like, what would be a good first step for somebody?
Yep. So what I want to say about that first real quick is that neurochemically, an emotion can only last for 90 seconds. So from release in the brain, right? From when that happens, it actually only lasts for 90 seconds. You know, and people are probably listening to this being like, yes, I've been mad for 8 years. But right. But it's the stories that we attach. It's the meaning we give it and what we say about it that has the experience of the emotion last beyond those 90 seconds. So with that said, the easiest technique and tactic is the Navy SEALs 4x4 box breathing.
Okay.
Right. It's 4 breaths in at 4 counts, 4 breaths out at 4 counts times 4 rounds. Okay. So it's literally breathe that in for 4 counts, hold it for 4, then exhale for 4, hold it at the bottom for 4, and then start over and do that 4 times through. And it is the fastest way to release some anxiety, the nervousness, the anxiousness. Again, it's a Navy SEAL tactic. It's well known and widely used, and it's so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. There, in those moments where you feel like you can't control anything, right? You can, in fact, control a breathing exercise if you're aware of it, right? Yep. And I think that's another thing that somebody could benefit from with getting connected with you is the awareness, right? I tell businesses when I work with small businesses with our Unbreakable Business platform that most businesses' issue is an awareness issue. People just don't know they exist. But for most of us, our lives, our biggest issue is an awareness issue. Number one, we don't even know that there's a problem. And number two, we don't know what to do about it when we get there, right?
Goodness gracious, yes. We don't know what we don't know. We don't even know what we don't know. Yeah, so, awareness is the base.
Yeah. Well, and becoming self-aware is the first step, I think, in becoming your most authentic self. So, and obviously that was probably the biggest step of your journey, right? Was becoming aware.
Girl. Okay. So when I started Landmark, when I went into Landmark, the first story that I uncovered, the first whole system of problem, if you will, that I uncovered was me believing that I didn't belong in my family, right? I don't belong. I'm not loved. I'm not worth it. Not enough. All those, they were all tied up into one big thing, right? And I hadn't talked to my dad. Actually, I talked to my dad. I hadn't told my father I loved him very much for about 10 years. Wow. But through doing Landmark, I realized that me not telling him I loved him was how I pulled the strings. It's how I managed control, because he, to me, was this big, powerful, amazing man. And the only way I could have power was to withhold my love. And when I figured that out and learned that, and don't ask me how to explain how I figured that out and learned that, because I couldn't tell you. It was 15 years ago at this point, but it was such a smack in the face. And at the same time, I was like, oh, but I can do something about it, right? And so I got lucky enough. I mean, I had the conversation with my father. I told him, I love you. I'm sorry. You're my hero. I want a relationship with you. I've been doing this thing and it's giving me the opposite of what I want. And I had to tell him to shut up and listen to me because I didn't want him to interrupt me. And when I finished, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, because when I finished telling him the story, he said, thank you. And he said, I want a relationship as well. And then he gave me the dagger, which was, I just thought you didn't want to hear it from me anymore. And that was like that moment of, damn, I sure was creating my own reality. Wow. And we've never had the same relationship since. We're much closer. We have an incredible relationship. So circling back to what you said a while back, what's the cost of not having awareness, taking responsibility, and diving into these things? It's your life. It's the people in your life and the life you deserve to have.
Yeah. And the gift of relationships. I mean, I believe that's such a gift. Now, a lot of times, just like any gift, you can roll it in the mud and it can be manipulated. It can have all kinds of stuff attached to it. But that's all of us, right? Yeah. We all have stuff attached to us, but we're all so worth the pursuit.
Yep. Yeah. And you might not get the outcome I got. You might go take responsibility and go try to mend or whatever it is, and you might not get the outcome you expect or desire, but it's not about the outcome. Yeah. In this case, it's about taking the journey towards it and learning and moving on.
Yeah. 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 It's just like any kind of commercial. Results may vary.
Results may vary. Yes, let me make sure you realize I'm not telling you it's going to go really well if you go do that, okay? But it might, and it could.
But you'll know, yep. Right? And that's, I think, part of the thing too. And that's overcoming or confronting that fear of, well, what if? Well, now I know. Now I know. And now I can confirm that those thoughts were real and that was a thing. Or I can confirm that it wasn't, and now I can go slay the next giant in my life, right?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think, people are so terrified of conversation. We go back to like the courage and the vulnerability, but we're also not taught how to communicate. And that's a big part of what Irina and I spend our time in our workshops and our team building stuff and private coaching, is learning how to communicate with people, because we are not taught how to communicate effectively.
No, we're not. And we're not taught to. I believe that communication is the best expression of love that anybody can give. Here we are trying to show love through flowers or through, through acts of service or whatever. No, it's communication, because that is the only way you can get a true glimpse into somebody else's thoughts and heart, right? Everything else is just smoke.
I love it so much. I joke all the time that the 5 love languages should have 6, because communication should be the 6th love language, because it's mine.
Oh,
Deep, meaningful communication. Yes, please.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love it. Well, Jen, I love the work that you do. And I loved then when you popped up and said, yes, I want to be on Storytime, I was so blessed and honored and grateful. And I know that there's individuals that are going to be on here watching. There's people that are probably like, I ain't got no problems, but my whole work crew does. So how can somebody connect with you? I mean, obviously they can Google the Academy of MotivAction, but tell us how they can best connect with you and what that start of that journey could look like.
Absolutely. So Jen with 1 N at academyofmotivaction.com, and it's motive with no E, and it's a long email, I get it. But you can find it on our website as well. I'm on all of the social medias, the Instagrams and the Facebook and the LinkedIn. Instagram is _Jen Hardy. You can DM me if that's comfortable for you as well. And again, on our website, have lots of places where you can click to connect with us in any way. And we'd love to, get on the phone and chat or meet for coffee and have a conversation about how we can support or just what's going on. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us and for being vulnerable and sharing your story. I know that so many people's stories are still yet to be written, or the next chapter is still hiding because they're stuck. And I hope today's talk helps them get unstuck.
Yeah. I hope so too. And I'm grateful for the work that you are doing. I'm grateful for the podcast that you're doing and how you're bringing this content to people. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, we will see you soon, Jen. Thank you. Well, friends, thank you for joining us today on Storytime. I hope that the story with Jen that she shared with you, parts of her journey, parts of her life that were vulnerable. But, without parts of our story, where is our impact? And my question to you today, there are hard things in your story. There are moments in life that you probably wish that you would have never dealt with. And as she said, a lot of times it's little T's or big T's that lead us to a place of taking the next step in life. Well, I believe that now could be the best time for you to do that. You see, your story is so important. Your story is yet to be finalized. You still have chapters among chapters to write. And maybe there's some freedom in there. And maybe there's some redemption in there. And maybe there's some survival in there. And maybe there's some reaching down and lifting somebody else up in there. But whatever it is, I hope and pray that you embrace your story to the fullest potential and live the life you were intended. So thank you for joining us today on Storytime. Until next time, continue writing your story.